Welcome everyone to the Agile Austin Coaching Meetup. We're so glad that you're all here with us today. We've just been spending a few minutes chatting and getting to know each other, and we're so glad that you all can be here. Let us tell you a little bit about who we are. I'm Sig Markle, and I'm joined by Lonnie Dane. We host the Agile Coaching. Sig, if you haven't been here before. And our goal is really to try to bring in topics that will help Agile coaches develop their career paths, their and maybe things outside of the typical Agile coaching or the Agile sphere. We're also looking to expand our box a little bit and think about things like clean language or graphic facilitators, mindfulness experts. So we do have kind of a broad set of topics, and we meet every first Monday at 6:15 Central. Although we are virtual, we welcome people from all time zones. We are part of a larger group of meetups across Agile Austin, including Agile at Scale. There's a book club. Right now, we're currently reading a book called, I don't have it nearby, The Art of Action, which is really interesting. I'm about 4 chapters in, and it's very good. We have a Scrum Master meetup, a leadership meetup, and we also do a monthly speaker series. I believe, Kim, you might have been one of the recent speakers on that. So if you're interested in any of our other topics, you can find any of those at meetup.com/AgileAustin. So Agile Austin, who are we? We are a 401k nonprofit, and our goal is to connect people through collaborative events, through education, and through community. And we're all passionate about delivering value through Agile. And we want to thank our sponsors. We are very appreciative to you all for your support, and thank you for being a sponsor. If anybody is interested in sponsorship, you can consider the benefits of that and speak to our board. Contact at Agile Austin if you're interested in being a sponsor. We also have membership, and included in that is a Slack group, the ability to vote and sit on the board, which we just had elections recently. So that's very exciting. And we also have special events and training discounts that come through. And I think it's $35 a year, not too much. It's worth it for me anyway. Speaking of our board, we did just have elections, but this was our 2022-23 board members. This probably, I think we actually have the exact same board going into next year. So I don't think we'll see many changes here, but I'll have to double check that. But this is our wonderful board. And if anybody has any questions for them, they're very receptive to those at board@agileaustin.org. Next month, we are going to take a break. We are doing a summer break, no meetings in July, but we will return in August, and we will have Aaron Randall join us to talk about Agile coaching supervision and where that may fit in the coach's toolbox. We're really excited to have Aaron. Many of you may know her. It should be a dynamic and interesting topic. And with that, I think, Lonnie, will you introduce our speakers for this evening?
Yeah, definitely. So we are glad to have 2 great Agile experts joining us. So we have Nono Donsa, who's an Agile coach and trainer, and she's been working in the IT industry, but has also worked in financial services, retail, digital media, advertising, kind of a lot, which is awesome. So she's bringing a lot of that expertise and her joy of learning and teaching. And then Deon Meyer is joining her. Like he said, he got dragged into it, but thankfully we're glad to have his perspective. He comes as a developer and also experience as a Scrum Master. So really bringing kind of that wonderful execution and how do we really optimize what's going on. And Deon loves playing games and entertaining, and hopefully I've already seen a little preview. Today will definitely be entertaining. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Nono and Deon.
Thank you, guys. Just quickly, some background. So the talk really spawned from a project when Deon and I were working together at one of Africa's largest retailers. the background from a company perspective, the company was undergoing their first agile implementation / transformation, and Deon and I were two of the Scrum Master teams in that organization. So what we're sharing today is really some of the hard lessons which we learned, possibly some mistakes, and then a few of our successes. Deon, am I missing anything?
No, I think that's about it. Just before we get started, there were two terms I was concerned about whether you all would understand it, but I did a little research and I found, okay, it's not an issue. So we refer to, there's going to be an email being sent to a municipality, so we refer to municipalities, but I see you all have municipalities as well, so that's good. And then we'll be referring to a tool called WhatsApp, same as or similar to iPhone's instant messaging and all of that. So it's just an instant messaging tool. But I think the rest of it should all be relatable, hopefully.
Mommy duty.
Yeah. So,
Right.
Donnie, you want to kick it off?
Let's do it.
Okay.
We're on a road trip. We're traveling to some epic place, and we must cross a mountain pass to get there. Halfway over the mountain pass, a road trip grinds to a halt. There's a massive rock in the road. There's no immediate way to get around it, or at least based on what we can see. So we get out of the car and we inspect this huge rock. And then we start to ask some really strange questions. Whose rock is this? Who put this rock here? It's not our rock. Someone must come move it. You, leader person, please escalate this so someone can move this rock. We're in a hurry. What's the next thing we do? Well, it's not our rock, so it's not our responsibility to move it, right? So let's call people who are responsible. Let's mail them because we're business people. And well, you know, business people mail. The email, I suspect, something similar to this.
Dear municipality that owns this mountain, we're on a very epic road trip and we can't proceed since this rock is here. You need to send somebody to move it right away because it's impeding our journey. It's very urgent. Kind regards, the road trip crew.
Whose rock is this? Who put this rock here? Why do you think are the reasons behind these questions? A tweaked version of the British writer William Foster Lloyd states the following. Everybody sees what's wrong, but nobody feels compelled or empowered to do something about it because, well, the thing in question is not theirs. So going back to my question, if we can determine who is responsible for this rock, then we know who to contact to action some kind of solution, right? But is this the right question, though? In a lot of cases, yeah, perhaps. But what happens if the third party is not available? What do we do then? Do we just fold our arms? Now, taking this back to your work environment, does the following dialogue sound familiar? Has this rock been moved yet?
No.
Why?
Well, we mailed the municipality and we haven't received a response yet.
And
they obviously need to send us one.
well, did you try send them an email? Did you check their Twitter feeds?
No.
Did you do anything else other than wait?
No, it's not my job.
Why do you think that?
Well, we mailed them. This is their rock. It's part of their mountain after all. So it's their responsibility now, right? I mean, if they don't do it, it's on them. If they don't check their mail, that's on them. It's not on me. I did my part. The statement, it's their responsibility now. I'd like us to take a closer look at that. Firstly, if you purely go by definition, then the word responsibility is defined as assuming the obligation to carry out and complete your duties. Simple enough. Your duties and goal, in this case, is getting to the final destination. We're all on this epic road trip, after all. So, if getting to that final destination may mean that you will have to find some side roads around this rock, or even remove the rock entirely, then guess what? This infers that you are responsible for the rock as well. And if we take it a step further and say that the goal is team-based, we're all traveling together after all, then surely the whole team is responsible for the removal of this rock. Regarding ownership and responsibility, there were a few lessons that we learned early on that we wish to share. Firstly, coach the teams to define team goals for every project, sprint, iteration, deliverable, initiative, whatever. When success is the same destination for the whole team, team members are more open to pulling together, taking responsibility end to end, less room for individualism. Tightly coupled with responsibility is taking ownership, the decision to have a sense of personal investment in the issue. We want to create teams that are responsible for their delivery and that take the necessary actions required to get to the desired outcome. The key is to coach teams from taking responsibility to taking ownership. Number two, co-create an environment of team safety so that once responsibility is understood, team members are open to personally invest in getting to the destination. A lot more difficult to do if you don't feel safe. Number three, accountability is the dream. This is where the team is open to scrutiny and comfortable with being the wringable neck, so to speak, as far as their delivery is concerned. This one metric is one that we would have used back in the day when Nono and I were working together for measuring high performance teams. We didn't quite achieve that standard back then. In summary, when someone is responsible for a task, the person is in charge and has the duty to complete that task. It's rational, largely cognitive, using the head, less to do with emotions. But when someone has ownership of a task, the person possesses it and treats it as mine. It belongs to me. It comes from the heart. There's emotions of possession and pride.
Returning back to our story, we find the road trip crew still stuck. It's getting late, they're tired, and getting frustrated. Who was in charge of planning this route in the first place? The driver speaks first. I just drove the route I was being navigated. It's not my fault. The navigator jumps in. I am new to this area and I don't know this terrain as well as most of you do. Not my fault either. Looking at the planner, weren't you in charge of scouting the route? The planner chimes in, yeah, I checked the municipality's Twitter feed and there were no reports of rockfalls. Sorry, bud, not my fault either. Perhaps if the driver didn't arrive late, we might not have been caught by this rock in the first place. Now, since the rock is impeding the entire team, from realizing their shared goal, the entire team needs to take responsibility.
Looking back at these questions, whose rock is this? Who put this rock here? It's not our rock. Have you or your teams ever faced a rock? Some of you may have dealt with massive boulders, some more of a rock fall situation. You have those days. What we all have in common is that we've all dealt with rocks, or what we commonly refer to as impediments in our professional lives. Now, in our day-to-day, we'll typically deal with two types of impediments. We have impediments that's within the team's control to resolve and capacity to resolve, and we'll refer to these as team-based impediments. And then you get those large impediments outside of the team's control to resolve. They typically need some third-party intervention or higher authority, and these we'll refer to as organizational or global impediments. The impediments that we'll be talking to in this presentation is mainly team-based. It is our belief, based on our combined experiences, that most Scrum teams rarely maximize the intended use of their Scrum ceremonies when dealing with and mitigating impediments. And before we get to that, and Nono explain and take us through how we can better utilize the Scrum ceremonies to deal with impediments, I just want to remind everybody, we did just send a mail off to our municipality to inquire about this whole rock situation. Our phones are on silent. We're presenting this talk, but maybe naively on our part, we're expecting a response back before we finish this talk. So if you happen to see an email notification fly in, the clue will be, it'll be a massive envelope on the screen. Please feel free to unmute your mic or post in the chat and just bring it to our attention that we got an email. We don't want to miss it. Nono, over to you.
Thanks, Deon. I want to quote something from the Scrum Guide quickly. The Scrum ceremonies are designed to improve communication, identify impediments, promote quick decision-making, and as a consequence, eliminate the need for additional meetings. With that in mind, let us take you through how we use the Scrum ceremonies effectively to plan for and deal with impediments. I'll start with the first event in sprint planning. So when the sprint was being initiated and the work to be done was being laid out, we coached the team to be intentional about laying out the impediments as part of the work as well. When we were working with third parties, we invited them to the planning meetings. We coached the team to set a sprint goal, and it had to be clear. This was very useful when the team needed to decide which impediment to address first. During the usual sprint refinement sessions, the teams were also intentional about using these refinement sessions as a means to identify any additional impediments which would have crept up. So for every product backlog item that got taken into the sprint, when the team was having discussions around definitions of done, etc., we coached the teams to also have discussions around lead time and cycle time. So how long is it going to take from when the requester puts in the request to when the team delivers? Moving to the daily stand-up. We coached the teams to raise potential impediments and current impediments. I just want to add here, one of the things that we were strict about was for the team members not to wait for the daily stand-up to do so, but use the daily stand-up as the last responsible moment to raise impediments. We made our impediments quite visible. Back in the days, this was pre-COVID, so we were all still in the office in person. we had a physical board and we used a different colored sticky to make those impediments quite visible. It was always interesting to watch when management would walk past and the board would look like a Christmas tree. The joy of that was we would get immediate action. And then, so yes, and then also the daily stand-up was also used. We had sidebars afterwards, and we used these to facilitate quick decision-making for those decisions that needed to be taken, and not all team members were required. In the sprint review, the Scrum team raised global impediments, and attendees collaborated on what happens next. Something interesting which happened was one of my teams, they were delivering software, and the pre-production environment was not necessarily well maintained and it wasn't being invested in. The impact of that was that the environment was really, really slow. You'd click a button and you'd have to wait a couple of seconds before you'd get a response. Now, the team knew that this would be uncomfortable if this was the environment that they were going to do their review from. So they then opted to use PowerPoint. They would take screen grabs, put them in PowerPoint, and then when we had the stakeholders, they then show the stakeholders what was achieved during the sprint using PowerPoint. I coached the teams and I said, if you are not doing your review from pre-production, you are robbing the stakeholders of making a decision in terms of what to do about your pre-production environment. They don't know what's happening. So try and demo from pre-prod and let's see what happens. After a few weeks, the team finally agreed and the team demoed from pre-prod. And yes, at the click of every button, everybody had to wait. The stakeholders were feeling important and impatient, and this was not on. The advantage of having done that, though, was everybody was pretty clear on how much time was being wasted because this environment was not being upgraded. And within a few weeks, budget was made available. So the moral of my story, give the stakeholders an opportunity to collaborate on what happens next by being completely transparent in your sprint reviews. And then the last thing that we did for sprint reviews, hopefully all team-based impediments would have been reviewed and dealt with outside of the sprint review, but where appropriate, and if the team decided to, then the impediments could be brought into the sprint review again to empower the stakeholders to collaborate on what was to happen next. Lastly, the sprint retrospective. So the team then raised any other unresolved impediments during the retrospective, and the pattern that we found was the most impactful impediments were generally addressed first.
Boop, 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 boop. Calls very quiet. I didn't hear any notifications go off.
Is that the mail we've been waiting for, Deon?
Yes, we got a mail, no? We got a mail.
What does it say? What does it say?
Let me open it up. Clicking the open email button. Right, yeah, it says. Okay, cool. Municipality came back to us. Hey, road trip crew. Sorry to hear about the rock situation. Hope nobody was injured. Don't think so. I think we're all fine. We were sending over a crew immediately to deal with the situation. Regards, the totally awesome municipality. Great.
That is totally awesome. When do they get here?
That is a good question. I'm not sure. They didn't specifically say, other than immediate. While we're on the email, would we say, and I know it's a fictitious email, it's very silly, but would we say that that email was a good example of what we commonly refer to as effective communication? No, right? So one of the last bits of lessons that we learned in dealing with impediments is how do we go about our communication around impediments, or anything for that matter, in our day-to-day work situation. Now, there are about 7 communication principles. If you go and Google them, I'm sure based on the article, there might be a lot more. There are 3 that were the most impactful to us that we wish to share with you, and just how we went about applying them. First one is timeliness and urgency. In our day and age, the medium of communication determines your response time. So think about the difference of sending a request and getting a response when using either email or instant messaging or a WhatsApp message or LinkedIn or any of that, right? And what really nailed this on the head for us and grounded it in terms of how we go about using it was a particular situation we had with one of our vendors. So, as Nono mentioned, back in the day, we used to work for the largest retailer in Africa, and for our meetings, we always used to use group telephone calls. We had a landline teleconferencing service that we would use, and it worked like a charm. You know, everybody was on the call, so you were able to make decisions very quickly without everybody having to be in the same meeting room. This one particular vendor that we dealt with was up to the north of Africa, and the landline infrastructure between us and them was so bad that you could hardly make out anything being said in a call. So within an hour call, you would spend a good 30 minutes just trying to just repeat what you say. What did you say? It was a complete waste of time. So for that duration of the project, we reverted back to email. Problem with email is it takes time to get a response. It's not immediate. So how would you typically go about and make an email more immediate, the response? You would apply some urgency to it. You would escalate it. Would anybody wish to hazard a guess how you would typically go about escalating emails? You would CC your manager, your manager's managers, your boss, your teammate, everybody important, just to put the fear of God into the person, right? So although this worked for a time, the team came to us and said, hey, listen, this is all good and well, but we need something that's a little less high stakes. Every time you get a response, like, oh. So we ended up creating a WhatsApp group. This interesting messaging tool called WhatsApp was recently released. We created a group, added everybody to the group, and initially it was just a role of professionals, right? So it will be very light, the usage of it. They would say when they're running late for a meeting or can't connect to a session or something like that. But the more people started to use this group, the more they started to become interested in each other's lives. And they went from being roles of profession to actual team members, greeting each other, wishing each other happy birthday, pinging one another when there was a fire to be put out. This built up the relationships and also allowed us to utilize a faster response time or get a faster response time on all of our messages. This all reinforced our belief that the medium of communication that you use will determine your response time. So when dealing with a particular situation, ensure you're using the right medium of communication. Second one, clarity. Very important. Go back to that email. When are they going to arrive? We won't really know. Clarity, the point being communicated, and the associated actions that need to be taken should be clear to the receiver so that they understand what the sender is wanting to communicate. What helped guide us a lot is asking ourselves questions whenever we had to grow up communication. So who would be our target audience for this communication? Will everybody be able to understand it, especially if the communication is of a technical nature? And would a picture perhaps serve us better? So think about the content of your communication, what it's going to look like, who your audience is going to be. Number three, and maybe most importantly, attention and style. Your choice of words creates a reaction in the receiver. And you're thinking back to the whole escalating scenario, I can imagine there won't be too many well-placed choice of words in the responses that you get from those kind of emails. What helped again just reinforce this is think of phrases that you would read either in text or email or whatever that would trigger you, right? For us, it was as per our previous email. Okay, so now I have to go through like 50 other emails and try to find out what this person said. Or scroll up for context was my favorite one when you had a chain mail of, again, 20, 30 miles long. Doesn't work, right? So be careful about the words that you use and the styling that you use. I'd be curious to hear from you all after the session. What works for you these days? We have remote working now in most companies, and we work across different time zones, different cultures. Yeah, let us know what works for you guys, how you guys use their communication, wherever you are. It would be interesting to hear.
Deon,
Yes.
so what happened to the road trip crew?
Well, that's a good question. So they had the initial bickering. We did get the mail from the municipality, but nobody is locked up yet, you know. So, and they needed to get on with the journey. So they decided, you know what, let bygones be bygones. Let's just take responsibility. Let's just see if we can move this thing out of the way to a safe area on the side of the road and carry on with our journey. And that's what they did. Moved it out of the way and carried on with the journey.
So if you forget everything that we've said, and you only remember these 3 things, you would have done well. Point number 1, coach your teams to define team goals for every sprint. When a goal is team-based, the whole team is responsible for the delivery. The Scrum ceremonies are designed to improve communication, identify impediments, promote quick decision-making, and as a consequence, eliminate the need for additional meetings. Milk them to their full potential. Lastly, coach your teams to constantly revisit their communication practices so that they can identify when there are more effective means of getting the message across. Deon, did I miss anything?
No, that's it. We're done.
Over to you. Any questions?
If y'all have any questions, you can throw them in chat or come off mute, either way. One thing I was wondering, Deon and Nono, is one thing I've seen is where sometimes the team perceives an impediment as an organizational impediment. And though it could be something that the team could approach. Have you all faced that? And how have you kind of helped the team realize that they can actually do something that to them might initially look outside of their sphere of control?
If you don't mind, I'd like to go first on this one. We had an interesting scenario where this actually got highlighted quite painfully. I'm a firm believer of, and it might be maybe my inner sadist talking, but let the team experience some pain first in order to learn the lesson. We had a scenario where both of our team's testers quit simultaneously and blamed our developers for the reason that they left. So that wasn't good. The immediate effect of that was all of our deliverables grounded to a halt because the devs were of the mindset that they're not going to test. It's not their job. And we're like, okay, fine, but we need to get more testers. I said, okay, cool. So we made them part of the interview process to see. And the main idea was they could obviously get some transparency in the interview testers or anybody for that matter. And the second one was they could see firsthand, or they can ask the kind of questions that they want to ask in terms of what they expect from a tester. They wanted the tester to have some technical knowledge on the technologies that we were working with. And what I found out was the harsh truth is for their standards, there weren't really anyone in the market available. So this carried on for a month, 2 months, and they started getting frustrated. We're not delivering anything. We need to get testers. I'm like, no, the company needs to get us testers. You're sitting in the interview process. You are seeing firsthand are the interviews coming in. And it's not like these people aren't qualified. They're just not measuring up to your standards. And they said, okay, right, fine. We're going to take the situation into our own hands. Because previously I was coaching them, or was trying to coach them, to rather bring somebody, skill somebody up, right? So teach them the skills that you want them to know, and then, you know, cultivate their skill set and take it from there. And they weren't interested. And when they started to get to this realization, hey, we're not getting anything done. There's not really anybody out there that can do what we want them to do. Let's start looking internally. So 2 things happened. Number 1, they dealt with that particular impediment by taking over the testing responsibilities for the interim. They divvied up the work, and they would make sure that the testing gets done. And not only that, the rest of the team jumped in as well. BAs, everybody tested, including myself as a Scrum Master. We would all jump in the testing to help alleviate the workload. Number 2, we started reaching internally to the other teams. Hey, does anybody want to make a shift? And when we finally got a tester, we happened to have some of the technical knowledge, but not all of them. They were more invested in coaching this person and getting them skilled up. And he was ready to learn. And the 2 of them jumped. Or rather the 3 of them jumped, 2 developers and this 1 tester, quite well, as a matter of fact. And they started to work together. So that's how we dealt with that, that particular organizational impediment that became a team-based impediment.
That's a really cool story. I like the example of what I'm hearing from you was that you gave them kind of the visibility into the process. So it wasn't just like, hey, we're dealing with it. It's, this is what's going on, and do you all want to participate and be part of it? And so that kind of gave them the visibility. That's really cool. So yeah, thanks, Deon, for sharing that.
I think it's a powerful story, Deon. I'm not going to add to it.
Oh, man.
So I'm curious if there are any other, sorry, Lonnie, were you going to say the same thing?
There's a couple things coming up in chat.
Yes.
Jerry said, shouldn't cross-functional teams embrace continuous learning? Jerry, do you want to expand on that a little bit, or what's kind of?
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking that within a team, is every role or every task just singular, or as a team, should they not be interested in what each other's doing and maybe learn a little bit about the tasks that the team has been given? So in other words, is a tester only a tester, or can a tester also help a developer? And vice versa?
Ideally you would want that, right? So you would want, potentially T-shaped individuals, people specializing in a particular role, but crossing over to other roles. The problem is, though, we're working with people and they don't always necessarily agree with that. And what we had as well is we had a lot of very powerful, opinionated people, especially in my team, who believed their way of doing things, and they've always done it this way, and this is the way it's going to do things. So it took some effort to break them out of that. But yes, ideally you definitely need, cross-skilled team members. My current team, where I am now at a different company, of that mantra is fully embraced, and the team's performance is ridiculous.
Deon, if I can just jump in.
Yes, go for it.
So part of the background that we shared was that it was for this particular retailer, it was their first implementation and transformation. So those cross-functional individuals, T-shaped, that was part of the job that needed to be done, because when someone applied for the job, their title was tester, and that's what they did. Then this agile business came around, and some things needed to change. So I suppose that's why we were there, to assist in coaching the teams, I suppose, transform their thinking as well.
It was the coaching aspect I was really thinking about in terms of the Scrum Masters serving the team in their knowledge
Exactly.
around helping each other and the common goal.
Mhm.
I just had this visual in my head around the testers finishing their part, the developers developers still going, but nobody's helping the tester finish their role. And as a team, they all fail.
Exactly. So that's also part of where the shared goal came in. So if the goal was to finish, I don't know, product X or this part of the product. So when the team would get to the review, guess what? You can't say as developers, well, we were done. And then the tester say, well, we didn't have time. So if the goal was shared and the deliverable for the whole team was to do something, then the team needs to jump in so that that thing or that goal can be achieved. So that's also a little bit of part of the coaching that happened. Cross-functional individuals, also looking at shared goals. We also had to discuss for the teams that were using Scrum, what were the Scrum values and what would those look like in action for the specific teams.
Well, again, going back to the values, the review would have been fairly embarrassing for the whole team and
Yes.
dysfunctional when you
Yeah, I mean,
present
Well,
it back to the stakeholders.
so
yeah, go on.
So thinking about that time, we did have a lot of awkward and uncomfortable conversations. If you think about what we know now and what we expect, we kind of expect the teams to know now as well. Some of the conversations we did have were, but I did this and she didn't. And some of that happened in the sprint, in the review session. And it was normal in the organization at the time because, well, traditionally, that's just how things worked. So again, the jobs of the coaches and the Scrum Masters were turning that around. If we think about agility being a mind frame, a lot of the coaching needed to happen across all levels. So yes, we had our jobs cut out for us, which is why this talk is quite a big deal, because at the end of the day, we were actually able to have discussions around cross-functional teams, self-managing teams, etc.
So what did the retros look like? I mean, how did they go down? That must have
I'll
been
tell
an
you
interesting
this, there's a separate
experiment.
talk altogether.
It
No,
was rough
seriously.
in the beginning. It was rough. Yeah. And again, this is why I stated, the inner sadist in me, we shouldn't shy away from pain. Pain is a learning experience. And you can use any experience as a learning experience, but pain definitely is one of the highest impact learning experiences. And Jerry, you referred to the refinement, or not the refinement, the review sessions. There was a lot of embarrassment. And the stakeholders were there. And I mean, they were all familiar with each other in terms of from a professional level. They've known each other for years, the teams and the stakeholders, in a lot of cases. So when something wasn't delivered, the stakeholders was asking the obvious question, why wasn't this delivered? And we didn't answer as coaches. Our product owner didn't answer. The team had to answer, why wasn't this delivered? They had to own up to it. And that served as additional motivation as well down the line.
I think the biggest anti-pattern we had to guard was creating the perception that the retro was an ammunition meeting. So it still needed to happen, but it wasn't. If something, we also needed to be intentional about coaching, address as it arises, address as it arises, address as it arises. And then if unresolved or we're struggling or we're butting heads, then bring to the retro as well. So the retros were quite interesting. My intent though was I didn't want people to dread the retro because, oh my gosh, on Tuesday I did this and she gave me a look and I'm pretty sure it's going to come up in the retro. That was not the spirit.
So did people feel safe in the retro that they could be transparent in what happened in the prior sprint?
One interesting fact was, so the audience in the retro, a lot of the time you would think that sometimes you want the product owner in the retro as well. When the team didn't feel safe, they didn't want the product owner in the retro. sometimes legitimate, sometimes not. I think what was interesting then was in the event where the team did not want the product owner in the retro, but there was something that the product owner needed to know, then we'd ask the team again, so how does the product owner get access to this information or this learning or this pattern that you think exists? So there wasn't always safety. Again, first implementation, there could have been a culture of, I suppose, fear, consequences. If you drop the ball, then what? So we needed to deal with all of that, again, with time. We also needed to, Deon introduced me to the drama triangle. So we didn't want to become the rescuers and everybody and some people were feeling the victim. We really wanted, if something's happening and somebody needs to know, the immediate question to the group was, so how do we get them access to this information? So yes, so I suppose the short answer is initially the retros were uncomfortable, the teams didn't feel safe. We did checks in terms of how likely are you to have an honest discussion in the retro when the product owner is not here before every retro, and then we started modifying as things started to change.
So how did you implement any learnings that come out?
Can I just jump in and
retro?
excuse me, Jerry? There's a lot of questions in the chat.
Oh, Kim, I was
Sorry.
actually just about to.
There's
Just a
other
second.
people that might want their questions answered.
Yeah,
as
in fact, I think where Jerry's going might relate to one that Naraz has asked about impediments. I'm wondering if during the retro or as other impediments came up, the question is, were they added to the backlog or was there a separate impediment backlog? So there may be, that's sort of related, I think maybe where Jerry was going as well. So Nono or Deon, how did you handle the impediment backlog?
We, yeah, I mean, when we started, literally the first month that we started, we obviously, well, within the first sprint, we noticed that nothing was getting done due to all of these impediments, and we started to visualize these impediments. And for a time, we actually split up our board to have a separate backlog just for impediments. And just to measure the impact, we would weight our impediments after they were resolved, how much effort did it take to resolve them. And we ended up with our, let's call it, weighting of the story points, not really story points, but the weighting of the impediments outweigh our story point for the sprint. So we would add it everywhere. We would put it into the product backlog, we would put it into the sprint backlog. When it goes onto the board, we would track the progress of it, everything. An impediment had its own life. And it again was visual for everybody to see. And the first, let's call it a home run that we got from that practice was our boss's boss came by our board one day and said, "What on earth is this?" We said, like, "David, this is all impediments." And I said, "This is ridiculous." "Yes, we agree. It's completely ridiculous." And they actually started to invest in what they called no impediments. I don't know what they gave like a particular term, no impediment sprint or something like that. And they was, can we go through 2 sprints with as little as impediments as possible? And what that then changed to was an impediment would get an owner from senior management or a stakeholder or product owner or somebody that would take ownership of it and would drive it as quickly as possible to get it done. So yes, we added impediments everywhere. The moment an impediment arises, it goes onto the board, it goes into the backlog.
Equal ownership. Yeah, I like that.
So for us, after every retrospective, for the next sprint planning, the team needed to decide on 1 or 2 impediments that they were going to be addressing first, because inspection without adaptation is pretty pointless, right? So what would have been the use of having an impediment backlog, but then when we start a sprint, we've got all these activities that need to happen and nothing about the impediments. So we take on 1 or 2. I wasn't necessarily driving to get the impediments backlog down to 0. I generally found that the most pressing impediments, if it was, for example, an environmental issue, like I mentioned, pre-production, that was pretty big. when the stakeholders collaborated on what to do next, it had budget implications, it had testing implications, so that was added and it was tracked. I found also that some impediments fell by the wayside, and it was very interesting to see the impediments that kept coming up, and if unresolved, were also the same impediments that the team then would decide, only 1 or 2 to take into the sprint. And the reason I'm putting a WIP limit on 1 or 2 is because, 1, considering the work that needs to be done, but also 2, if there's more than 1 or 2, the impediments become less pressing because the team now starts seeing them as part of the work. So that's how I dealt with it in my teams.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. The next question, I think, from chat is Kim. I don't know, Kim, do you want to actually read your question out loud, or do you want me to read it for you?
No, I was just curious as to, it seemed like, and maybe I was misunderstanding, that having the team set goals was kind of like a big part of the solution, or maybe the entire solution for teams taking responsibility and accountability. So I was curious then, like, what kind of goals were they doing that made that shift? It seems kind of miraculous to me, but I would love to know. Sounds like it's pretty amazing.
So the main reason why we wanted the teams to set goals was to encourage ownership. So if I can give an example of a goal, it could have been something as enable gift cards, enable Apple Store gift cards. So that would be a global goal. There would be work in there that would need to be done. And in order for the team to get to that goal, the work needed to be completed, and it wasn't necessarily tied into who completed the work. So going back to Jerry and the questions that he asked, in order for the gift cards to be enabled, some testing would have needed to happen, some bugging would have needed to happen. So then it wasn't about, did the testers test and debug? It was about at the review session, did we enable the gift cards? So whatever it took that the team needed to do to enable the gift cards, all the team members had to chime in. Because when the question was asked, did you deliver? It was to the question, were the gift cards enabled? I'm not sure if that speaks to what you're asking.
Okay, I'm glad you're giving that example, because I assumed team goals was like a team agreement. How do we want to be together as a team, versus it sounding like the team goal is kind of like a sprint goal, or even a product goal if it's beyond the sprint of things they're wanting to do. But usually, yes, the team will create a sprint goal. So are you saying a sprint goal?
So let me clean up my language. Team goal is equal to a sprint goal. So sprint goal at every sprint. You use the word usually. When we were with that team, because it was the first implementation, there was nothing usual about any of what we did. So what is normal to us now, if we think about, do we have working agreements? Do we have a definition of done? How do we handle impediments? Do we have cross-functional team members? What does a self-managing team look like? We were on ground zero. We were from traditional waterfall. This agile thing came up. How are we going to do it? So what is obvious now? Before every sprint, you have a sprint goal, you have a sprint backlog, and you have a plan. That wasn't normal then.
Yeah. So what I'm an agile transformation coach, so I totally understand that. So I think what I'm hearing you saying is, in the transformation as step 1, going from waterfall to agile, something that really helped the teams not only move forward with agile, but moving forward with that, taking responsibility, accountability, and working together as a team. That team mindset was really having them focus on the sprint goal as one of the first steps that you focused on.
You've summarized it quite well.
Okay, that's really insightful. Thank you so much for that.
There was a second function to the sprint goal as well. The teams, we had 3 teams working in a department. They were working with a product base that had over 200 vendors. So there was a lot going on at any given time. Teams were working on multiple projects, more often than not, multiple vendors, as a matter of fact. So the sprint goal wasn't only there to create a single-minded focus in terms of what we as a team need to deliver. It was also there as a shield and barrier to bat anything else away that might interrupt that particular goal. That was an extremely important function, because there was a lot flying around. There was, especially in the beginning, we had stakeholders coming down. Hey, can you do this thing? Can you do that thing? Whatever. And we had to coach them, especially the stakeholders as well. If a stakeholder came down and they interrupted our sprint with a deliverable and they used kind of that hard-handed tactic, we would put up an impediment. It's blocking our deliverable. And during the review session, we would discuss that. The sprint goals had dual focus, or at least dual goals at all times. Focus the team, bat everything else away. And the moment they started to see that it worked, it again just reinforced their belief and their trust in the process. And it started to grow from there.
But also, I think hindsight is a blessing, I suppose I can say, because the talk packages it quite neatly. So the teams had sprint goals. A lot of that was, it looks packaged now in hindsight, and we also had to literally distill and filter what happened over those years. So yes, a lot of the retrospectives, as Shay would have said, were uncomfortable. A lot of the reviews were who, not necessarily the team, but I want a name. So it was a lot of coaching around that which needed to happen.
So I'd like to prompt one more question. I think maybe two, we'll see, depending on how long the answer goes, because y'all have lots to offer. About how long, so the question from Tom is, how long did it take for people to get transparent about their impediments? But I'm also curious about the length of the engagement for transformation that y'all were going through, and how long did it take? How long did the actual story unfold for y'all as you were working on this? And then maybe Jerry's question is similar too. Did the culture ever change over time?
So about 18 months to start, I almost want to say taking your hands off the levers so that the teams could literally start. For example, if there's a requirement that's coming in and it doesn't speak to the sprint goals, for the team to actually say, hey guys, what does this mean then for our sprint goal? So 18 months for the team to actually ask the difficult questions themselves. I think as far as the cadences were concerned and the sprint events or the Scrum events were concerned, for teams that are getting the mindset shift, the coaches' work in most instances is really just that timekeeping and that facilitation. It took about 18 months as well to get there, whereas previously it was facilitation, but also refereeing, training, and coaching. It is 2 a.m. South African time. Excuse me, my daughter's right here. So, yeah, Deon?
That's about that time, as Nono said. Overall, we had a staggered approach. So what kind of hampered our transformation is the entire company wasn't going the agile route. It was only one department. So it was one department trying to optimize their process flows and the way they work while dealing with a very rigid waterfall flow with the rest of the departments. It was very slow in the beginning. I know my team was onboarded as like the trial period team, and we had basically a 6-sprint flow before the coach that we had basically got hands off and I started to take over full time. But yeah, it was very slow. I think knowing what we, yeah.
But also you guys also know what happens when the perception is that the teams need to transform and nobody else. Well,
Yeah.
You know what happens when management doesn't think they need to transform. So we had a lot of those barriers, and by the time that we were disembarking, the organization was starting to transform at all levels.
Yeah.
But definitely only having that team layer transform can make things quite difficult because everything else stays the same, right?
Yes,
Yep.
definitely have been there. Yeah.
Yeah, my question had to do with transparency and courage, I guess, is the two best values to go with. I've been to probably hundreds of retros and stand-ups and all that kind of stuff. No one has any blockers. And you know that's not a fact.
Right.
How long did it take to get your teams to actually be open about that they did have something that was an impediment to them getting something done?
I think we were blessed in that sense where we were. Again, teams with strong opinions. Stuff had been going wrong the whole time, and there had been continuous issues before we started rolling out Agile. And what we said is, hey, if something is blocking our progress, we need to make it visible. We need to make people attend to it. And people were eagerly willing to speak up. I got an impediment. I got an impediment too. Everybody's got impediments. And we started to raise this, and Nono said, prioritize them, mark those that are truly important and impeding, and tackle them first. And part of the visualization of it all was to show to management, right? To the point where they started to buy in and said, listen, of course, the excuse was, you're not doing any work, right? And the teams are like, we can't do any work. We're being impeded to high water. So management started to commit, and we used the reviews as well to deal with those organizational impediments, bat them off to management. Who of you guys in this room will take and deal with this particular thing, to take ownership? And that again reinforced the transparency around the impediments, not necessarily not wanting to raise stuff, but knowing that when it gets raised, it gets dealt with and it gets completed and done, moved off the table, next thing. That just reinforced that willingness to raise impediments. That's at least in my experience. Yeah.
So something I learned now, or at least the terminology, if you look at waste snakes, so during the sprint, as you start seeing, so for example, if you see that you wanted to do something and you had to wait, so you would also put that to the waste snake. If you wanted to, you were going to be deploying code into production and CAB was postponed and therefore you couldn't, so that would be waste as well. So modern day thinking, now it's called waste snakes, but back in the days, we did the same thing. We just didn't call it that. So what's happening in your day-to-day that's making you go slower or making you wait or just not working for you? And then so every day as it happens, while you remember, you take a post-it note and you put it next to the board. And then if nothing comes up in the retrospective, we just really look at the sprint. What did it look like and what happened? And we'd find that a lot of the times we'd have conversation from that. And then also as a coach, you observe during the team. And if I can be completely transparent and open, if nothing's coming up in the retro, I would share what I observed and ask the team what they thought or what they made of that. Does that answer the question, Tom?
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I love that. So I think we have a couple that start to ask about the culture. So Jerry was specifically asking, did the culture change in the organization over time? Especially because you all talked about, you had one department. Did you feel like over those 18 months that culture changed?
I think the culture changed. It certainly wasn't over that 18 months. And what I attribute, the culture has definitely changed now. So what I attribute that to was, one, when the other departments were trying to transform as well, but also the biggest factor was when that transformation became across the board. So if the thinking needs to be different, if people now understand prioritizing versus the one who shouts the loudest, all of that will have an impact on culture. And for me, I attribute the biggest change to really being a transformation across. And that didn't happen in my lifetime.
You planted the seed and you got to start it. It just may take it long. Okay, awesome. We have one more question. We'll wrap up after this one. So Nawaz was asking, wonder how was leadership support and what things did they do to lead by example for instilling the new behaviors?
So once, again, a big milestone, and I keep repeating this and I apologize. The big milestone or big event was this wall of red stickies of impediments, be it an actual impediment or not. But that was one of the first key moments that management woke up and like, oh, wait, what's going on here? And seeing that pattern, it's not only our team, it's the other teams in our department as well, have the same situation. So that helped just to kickstart that drive. I think also getting them involved in the process. We did initially sell this process to them and say this will only work when you are all involved. And I had to sometimes resort to bribing our stakeholders to come to our reviews. Usually a good one was food, like pizza. Everybody loves pizza. Hey, come to review, get free pizza. While we have you here, let's talk about a few things. So that started to build up over time, because importantly as well is the trust and relationships that start to build up between the teams and their stakeholders. Teams start to ask questions to the stakeholders. We're doing all this work, we're building all these products, we're not seeing any feedback. We're not seeing how much income we're generating for the company. So the stakeholders would, once, I think, a quarter, invite the teams to go for a breakfast. And they would give feedback. Hey, your product has made so much money for the company in the past 3 quarters. And that feedback, again, just reinforced that relationship and that support that they ultimately gave the teams. But yeah, I think for me, at least, it all started with that wall of red that they saw when they woke up.
So for me, the biggest thing was when the business people themselves, they would ask around what is on the backlog when they'd use the word priority. So that was very encouraging to the team, because I suppose it drove home the message that business is getting it, that things actually need to be prioritized. I also think when business started making use of the product owner in terms of this is what's coming in, this is very urgent, where do you want to place this on your backlog? When the team started seeing that shift from a management perspective, that was incredibly encouraging. When we had global impediments, when management started resolving some of those global impediments, either by making the budget available, either by making the skill set available, that was also pretty encouraging to the teams. And then lastly, what was most valuable was, even though our business unit was the only one that was busy with the transformation, they kind of knew when our sprint ended, because that was when stuff would get deployed to production. So it was always interesting to see the interest in terms of what is going into prod now. So that was also encouraging to the teams, because they were delivering something, and after a set cadence, business knew that something was going to go into production. And what was interesting about that is, after every deployment, that's when stakeholders from different departments would then approach the product owner. Listen, I saw this was happening. Could you perhaps add this to your product backlog? Again, that language was encouraging to the teams, because it was now no longer this person is shouting the loudest, so maybe let's pay attention to them.
Okay. Thank you both. I know it's in the middle of the night and you did this presentation with your daughter on your lap. And it was really well done. I love the storytelling aspect of the way that you shared your story. It was very insightful. And I think from what I'm seeing in the chat, people got a lot out of it. So thank you so much for joining us. I would like to just close very quickly with a preview coming up in July. We will take a break, summer break. And in August, we will return with Aaron Randall, who's going to be talking about agile coaching supervision, which is an interesting tool for coaches who are developing their practice. So we hope that you'll join us again. And we thank you all so much. We could not have this community without you and your invested interest and participation. And again, thank you so much, Nono and Deon, for your fantastic presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. All right.